Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Controller. Today, we're going to talk about how the Sega Genesis and me finally came into a relationship. And I use that terminology very, very purposefully because the tale of the Sega Genesis is a tale of unrequited love. You see, much like many of us, as a sophomore in high school, I was pretty deeply in love with someone who wasn't in love with me. And you know, it wasn't like I was never actually rejected, which is still wild to me all these years later. But she had mentioned something about wanting to have a Sega Genesis, that she had asked for one and her parents said no. Well, at the time, the Sega Genesis was about $15 at Funko Land, used. And I went and bought it for her. Because, well, I was a love-struck idiot. Best part about it is, her parents made her return it to me. They made her give it back. Now, the reasoning for them making her give it back, I don't know. I don't know if they thought that I had spent however much the new price was at the time and got it for her, or they really just didn't want her to have it. But either way, it was returned to me. And I decided, well, hell, now I have a Sega Genesis. So I took it home and started to build a little collection of games, because back then you could get a lot of Sega Genesis games from Funko Land for under $5. Now, why the pricing structure was like it was, I can't tell you, but all I know is I had a lot of fun for not a lot of money. One of my favorite games for the Sega Genesis is the original Golden Axe. And that's because it was, it was an arcade cabinet inside of a 7-Eleven that I used to go to with my grandfather when he was delivering papers for the Washington Post. And on Saturdays, I'd go with him. Saturday mornings, he'd give me enough money for a coffee for him, an ice cream cone, and a play of Golden Axe. So, many, many years later, when I finally beat the game, it was kind of bittersweet, because typically when I beat a game, I don't ever go back to it. But that's a whole other conversation there. But one thing that the Genesis led to was I learned a fighting game for the first time. See, at this point I had not learned anything on the Super Nintendo. I had the Super Nintendo already. And I had not learned anything with fighting games. I still was complete and utter garbage. Some may argue I still am, but to those people, I say, shut up and boot up a lobby. But anyway, Eternal Champions. A game that I believe I got for 89 cents. I still remember that. I believe it was 89 cents. Like I said, Funko Land was great when it came to getting a lot of games for not a lot of money. Of course, when it became GameStop, things went downhill, but that's, again, another story for another time. But anyway, I learned Eternal Champions. I learned probably the first time I figured I had anxiety with Sonic the Hedgehog. The music change when you're underwater and eating that air bubble. I don't care what anyone says. That is anxiety-inducing stuff. And that was probably my first hint that I may have anxiety, which, hey, guess what? Spoiler alert, your boy does have some anxiety issues. From there, I learned a lot of cool games that I found. Earthworm Jim, Toe Jam and Earl. One of my favorite random what could this game be was a game called Truxton. I had no idea what the game was. I just knew it was like I think it was under $2. And I had a rule back then, was anything under, I think it was under $3, anything under $3, it didn't matter what it was, I was going to get it and give it a shot. Because you used to be able to return it if you didn't like it. And even then, at that price point, I wasn't returning it. Because that's just, I don't know, there's something wrong in my head with the idea of returning something that cheap. If I didn't like it, it would just get sent over to one of my friends. And if they didn't like it, well, I don't care, no give backsies. But another game that I really enjoyed was one that I didn't even know was actually on the Sega Genesis, but I had been introduced to it many years prior. It's a game called El Viento. And I was originally introduced to it on Nick Arcade. Nobody ever chose El Viento. Ever. Every time it was there, they went to something else. Nick Arcade was a blast. That's, again, like I say, another story for another time, but Nick Arcade was a freaking blast, and that's probably one of the few things in life that I have wanted to be on as a contestant. As a kid, that and Legends of the Hidden Temple were my two, if only I could moments. Yeah. So, like I said, the Sega Genesis, learning the codes eventually for Sonic the Hedgehog 2 to turn him into Super Saiyan mode, to be able to mess around with different things and learn how the different sound settings or sound previews, I forget the exact word that it was, what the terminology is for it, the sound previews, where you get the preview of different sounds for the stages or whatever, different combinations, created different codes, which was really cool and a really unique way of accessing codes back then. And from doing that to learning Eternal Champions, which you ask me to play it now, I can't do crap because, well, I think I can't do crap. I haven't played it in like 20 years. But It was the first fighting game I ever learned. Of course, later on with what I think was the best one, Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, I think is the best Mortal Kombat that existed for quite a while. Haven't played too many of the more recent ones, so I really can't, call it like the best of all time because I haven't played everything. But I think Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 really sits as like right there with Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo Edition as like the pinnacle of 16-bit fighting games. But yeah, the biggest thing about the Genesis was all the cheap games. There were a lot of cheap games. I played a lot of random things on there. And eventually, it would become probably my largest library as a kid. Simply because of how many games were cheap. But yeah, that's pretty much the story behind the Genesis. So, what do y'all remember about the Genesis? What were your first memories of it? What games were your favorites? All the things. Let me know down in the comments. And yeah, next time I'll tell y'all how I got banned from St. Charles Mall for life with the story of the Sega Saturn. It's a good one. It's yeah, I got banned. I'm not joking. I'm not setting this up as some stupid click crap for the future. I literally got banned from the mall for life on the day that I got the Sega Saturn. And how that happened still is one of my greatest accomplishments. But that's for, you guessed it, another time. Until next time, it's been Azure Tony. Peace. 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 Peace.